welcome to Tanzania Today, a program that aims to project Tanzania's position economically, socially, politically, and diplomatically to the world. And today we're going to discuss peace and security across the East African region and Tanzania's role in maintaining peace and security. And with me is a groundbreaking panel, members of panel. We have Dr. Richard Mbunda, who is a political analyst from the University of Dar es Salaam. We have Dr. Bravias Kahioza, who is an economic analyst. And we have Isa Omari, a political analyst, and Ambassador Dr. Msuya Mangachi, a retired ambassador. So before we get straight into the peace and security across the region, let us first look at the historical context. How was Tanzania involved in the liberation across African countries, and what was the role of Mwalimu Nyerere in this aspect? I'm going to throw this question to retired Ambassador Mangachi. Briefly, tell us about the role of Tanganyika and later Tanzania in the liberation of African countries across the continent.
Thank you very much. To understand the subject, we have also to look at it from a point of view of Pan-Africanism, because it was a task which the founder leaders of Africa at that time determined that it was the most urgent challenge facing the continent. Some countries were already liberated when the OAU was founded in 1963, but a number of countries, particularly in the southern African region, were still under colonial domination. Mozambique, South Africa, Angola, Rhodesia, which later became Zimbabwe, and Sao Tome and Principe Islands. All these were in southern part of Africa, and they were still under colonialism. So the first challenge that the continent faced was to come together and commit themselves to helping the liberation struggle until these countries were liberated. And Tanzania was chosen to be the headquarters of the Liberation Committee. And that is very significant in terms of the task. It was a continental task, and Tanzania was given this task. Why Tanzania? Because most of the liberation movements headquarters were here in Tanzania. ANC, ZANU, and later on ZANU PF, Frelimo, other liberation movements, they were headquartered here. So it was easier to coordinate the challenge of liberation from that perspective. And it took many years, but some countries started getting liberated. It was a big challenge agenda to undertake, but over time, results started coming. Mm-hmm. We saw Mozambique becoming independent. We saw Zimbabwe becoming independent. Namibia, I forgot to mention SWAPO, Namibia becoming independent, Sao Tome and Principe, and all the other countries. Then we had to take a little longer with the struggle in South Africa, because there the issue was apartheid, and it took a lot of effort, both as a country, but also with the collaboration of support from other African countries and other friends elsewhere, to put pressure, to bring pressure to bear on South Africa to liberate it from apartheid. Mandela coming out of prison and so on, and then becoming the first president of. So we say this was a big achievement, and Tanzania's role is very central to the whole process there. Of
liberation.
Yes.
Doctor, what do you have to say about that? What was the role that Tanzania played?
Yeah, In fact, the Honorable Ambassador has said it very well, but I would like to remind our viewers that, some political analysts and historians probably tend to forget that this role that Tanzania was given under the Organization of African Unity did not, come just in the 1960s and 70s when the frontline states was, established. Actually, it started with how, Mwalimu Nyerere, in collaboration with the other leaders in the East and Central African region, began to fight for, liberation of the region. So basically, it starts with the Pan-African Freedom Movement of East and Central Africa, PAFMECA, which was led by Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, Tom Mboya of Kenya, Milton Obote. These were the key figures over there. And it was established in 1958 for the objective of liberating the East and Central African region. But later on, they actually expanded the mission to include liberation of the Southern African region. So that's when the Pan-African Freedom Movement for East, Central, and Southern Africa was established in 1962. And you'd note that 1963 is when the Organization of African Unity is established. So already there was groundwork, and that's why it was easy, to ensure that the, Liberation Committee is hosted in Dar es Salaam, because already there were champions of the liberation movement in the, from Tanzania and the East African region.
Yeah. Dr. Kahioza, what do you have to add about the legacy of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere and others at that time in liberating the African continent?
I think the legacy of Tanzania and Mwalimu Nyerere at large is eminent. From the center of Nairobi city, where KANU was practicing its struggle, to the outskirts of Lusaka, to the center of Mozambique, to the streets of Luanda, Tanzania has its footprints when it comes to the liberation struggle. And I would like to point three main points. One is that Tanzania contributed immensely economically. It had to lose its economic resources to help in the liberation struggle in other countries. Let's put this in perspective. Between 1961 and 1969, Tanzanian economy was growing at 7%. And there in between, Tanzania started its struggle to liberate, to contribute to these countries. And data show that Tanzania had to spend almost 3.5% between 1964 to 1981 to the liberation movement southern of the Sahara. And there was enormous. In fact, there is no any other country in the region that had done that in terms of its economic, in terms of trimming its economic muscles to other countries. Number two, Tanzania contributed immensely again in terms of intellectual resources. Many young people from Tanzania worked as strategists, worked in some military strategies, and also there was a lot of push from here in Tanzania in terms from the intellectual aspect of it that propagated so much what it meant for the rest of the continent to be free. And that would mean that Tanzania couldn't manage to be free when other countries were not in that line. And remember, the University of Dar es Salaam here was the center of those intellectual intercourse throughout the region, and it had contributed greatly. Number three, which is very, very critical, Tanzania also helped the continent in that aspect in ways in which it helped the international platforms, I mean international organizations and international platforms, as a voice of the voiceless. And Mwalimu was very, very instrumental in that aspect. And history has been written that had it not been the way he played with the intellectual rigor in the international platforms, countries like Mozambique and the rest would have not been where they have gone through. So I think these three aspects are very important when you talk about the contribution of Tanzania in the liberation struggle, and thereby, of course, creating peace. Lastly, I would like to put this there at the footnote from the intellectual perspective. Mwalimu was educated, his intellectual horns were sharpened in Edinburgh, in the United Kingdom. So Mwalimu had read Adam Smith. And Adam Smith, as a father of modern economics, had said before, had written in 1776 in The Wealth of Nations, that for countries to get forward, they needed three things. One, tolerable systems of justice. Two, easy taxes. And three, more importantly, peace. And Mwalimu was all over Africa, all over the planet, suggesting, making his case that without peace, there can't be prosperity, and that we cannot forget. And that has helped a lot in the region, the continental level, and at the global level.
Doctor has explained the economic muscles that Tanzania used just for the political independence of other countries. And without a doubt, there wasn't any ulterior motive. It was just purely from Pan-Africanist viewpoint. What do you have to say about that?
Well, thanks for having me. And Nyerere's liberation legacy is unparalleled. I think we have to admit that. And actually, Tanzania lost blood and treasure, as Dr. Gai also tried to highlight here. And the liberation movement, first of all, if you talk about Nyerere's liberation legacy, it was not only limited to Southern Africa, the frontline states, but also across the continent and elsewhere. Mwalimu supported the Polisario front in Western Sahara, but also the PLO in the Palestine, particularly trying to liberate the oppressed people all over the world. Of course, they also supported the Biafrans during the Nigeria Civil War and so on and so forth. So this also reflects part of, because according to Mwalimu's perspective, is that the anti-colonial struggles were essentially a struggle for human dignity. And in order to live a dignified, because people lived, the colonial state was a legitimate state, and they were subjected to horrible things by the colonial state. And therefore, to live a dignified life, a life that is based on human dignity and human equality, these people have to be free from the claws of colonialism. And which is why the liberation gospel, it was integral to Tanzania's traditional foreign policy. And actually then Mwalimu even went further, even to liberate some of African states, to help liberate some of the African states that were under despotism, not only from colonialism. And this is reflective of the Kagera War. Of course, it was an act of self-defense, but also it was an act of humanitarian intervention. And it brought to some degree humanitarian outcome. It was based on humanitarian motive. And that humanitarian motive also, it was the underlying principle that guided Tanzania's role in liberation struggle across the continent and beyond, if you take the PLO.
Now, let's talk about the evolution now. From being a liberation base, now there is the formation of the East African Community, where one of the pillars is promoting peace and security and good governance. Ambassador, what now has been the role? Take us through the evolution from being a liberation champion to being now a champion in maintaining peace across the region.
Well, Tanzania has also played a major role in stabilizing the countries, particularly the neighboring countries. All did not end with just liberation. In Mozambique, for example, there was a movement called Renamo, which was destabilizing the government there. And we reached a point where even we had to physically send our troops to support the government of Mozambique, so that it doesn't fall into the hands of the insurgents who were being supported actually by South Africa at that time. And in the post-liberation period, Tanzania has played a big role in stabilizing the situation in Congo. Well, Congo is a complicated situation. The peace, I think, was disturbed when they killed the first Prime Minister of Congo, Lumumba, in 1960. And it has never stabilized ever since that time. And if you look at what Tanzania's role has been in Congo, even until recently, you would notice that it has played a major role. For example, when the insurgents in eastern Congo had to be confronted through the intervention of the peacekeepers from the SADC region. When Tanzania went there, they actually managed to disarm the M23. And it's only when that mandate was removed that M23, which is a big problem in Congo right now, regrouped and managed to cause the havoc they're causing now. And we still went back, I think, with the SADC mandate, which I think in the circumstances, I think it has been determined that we should withdraw, I think, that role. But Tanzania is also has been providing peacekeepers in Lebanon, in Southern Sudan, in Central African Republic. I think there are more than 1,500 soldiers who are contributing into that. And if you're talking of continuation of the role of maintaining peace beyond Tanzania, you have to take note of all these perspectives and interventions. Burundi, Rwanda, negotiations. You know, I personally, when I was director for Africa and Middle East, I was coordinator of the government officials who literally helped the first, the CNDD, FDD, to agree to go to elections and peacefully take power in Burundi. And that movement, that party is still ruling in Burundi today. In Rwanda, things didn't work well because of genocide which happened. But all the arrangements for a peaceful resolution of the conflict there were done here by Tanzania.
Doctor,
yeah,
Doctor,
please.
Yeah. Well, in fact, we talked about, for example, the role of the frontline states, of which Tanzania was a key actor. And of course, our founding father was chair of the frontline states. But you'd note that it is in Mwalimu's belief that, I mean, even after independence, after these countries had gotten their independence, he never believed that we could still maintain our political sovereignty and economic sovereignty as independent. I mean, as single states, as individual states. He believed in unity, and of course he's he's a renowned champion of the Pan-Africanism and African unity. And that's why, for example, after the mission of the frontline states was half completed because apartheid South Africa was still not liberated, that's when SADC, the first SADC, was created. Okay, so it was an attempt to try to unite efforts to achieve the goals of liberation, but at the same time to try and unite efforts to ensure that these countries that are now independent from the colonial powers, they maintain both political sovereignty and economic sovereignty. So basically, and the objectives were clear. Then later on, they were, of course, changed to the SADC that we know today. So in both fronts, we talked about Tanzania's role in PAF-MECA, and then Tanzania's role in PAF-MEXA, including the southern region. So in both regions, Tanzania actually propelled the creation of the communities. So the East Africa Community, which was created in 1967, and then SADC in the southern part of the African region. So it is, liberating these countries and to ensure that, they enjoy the fruits of liberation, political sovereignty and economic sovereignty. That's why, these initiatives to create communities were basically launched.
Thank you. Your take.
Yeah, I think in contemporary history, you cannot deny the fact that Tanzania has kept that historical responsibility. And we must say that Tanzania decided to assume this historical responsibility and has been doing it, and didn't stop when Mwalimu got away from relinquished power. Tanzania has remained in that trajectory. Number one, let's look at this, why this is very important. Because we have heard some people around the region saying, you see, these people are being told that they're peaceful, and this doesn't add anything. It is a decoy to make them be ruled by the people who are ruling them. But I think that's contrary to realities. Number one, if you look at the I think the United Nations Peace Report in 2024, it was titled the Economics of Peace. It is indicating very clearly that in the last year alone, the world lost about $17.7 trillion because of conflicts, because of lack of peacefulness. And that has costed the world, in terms of per capita income, for almost $2,200 per capita income. That just costed the global economy. And when you come to East Africa, the same report, a deeper dissection of it, showed that in the region where we are, Tanzania stands as an anchor state in terms of peace. It stands as an hegemonic state in terms of balancing the eruption, balancing the equilibrium, the peace equilibrium in the region. And this has not happened from the air. People have worked on that. If you read what Kofi Annan wrote immediately after the catastrophe of 2007 in Kenya, he was very categorical that our late president, Benjamin Mkapa, the retired president, Jakaya Kikwete, and the whole machinery of this country helped a lot to cool tensions there, and it helped them, of course, to have a way to move forward. And it was very, very dangerous, not only to Kenya during those times. It was also dangerous to the region. Tanzania played a very great role. But also, it's very important to add that in this aspect, Tanzania has also been a bit, you could say, a shock absorber, as they have said about Rwanda, Burundi, and the rest. In contemporary days, Tanzania has been at the center of negotiating peace in these countries which seemingly like they would fall into confrontations, into political tensions. We have good neighbors here around. It's not necessary to mention them, but I think that also has been a role. Lastly, it's very important to note that our political culture, which is dubbed as Tanzania as being conservative, or whatever name you'd like to call it, our political culture and the civilization has helped many countries around the region whenever there is a problem in those countries, because we are always accommodative. But two, we don't allow shenanigans that lead into unnecessary confrontations between one nation and another nation. That did not happen. That did not only happen in 1970s, 1980s, or in the early 2000s. It is still happening today, and that you cannot wish away. So I think, on my perspective, it's that Tanzania has continuously played its role in terms of peace and security in the region. But more importantly, it is an anchor state when it comes to the relationship between peace and economic stability.
Mwalimu had a comprehensive conception of peace. And his conception was not only limited to negative peace, which is absence of violence and so on, but also positive peace, addressing structural socio-economic inequalities, and which is why he was a champion for human dignity and human equality in that way. And this has contributed greatly in stabilizing Tanzania. And which was, as I said, Dr. Keyoza here, he was also accommodative to, of course, the refugees that were coming from neighboring countries, the Burundian crisis of 1972, and then the genocide and the Burundian crisis again in the 1990s. And he played a great role in that regard. And he was the chief mediator, actually, regionally, and he was part of the Burundi peace process that led to the Burundi Accords, although he died in 1999 and Mandela took over. But he was very instrumental, and maybe in some quarters they say somehow he was actually distressed because of the walkouts and the deadlocks, given that some of the parties to the conflict in Burundi were unwilling to engage in peace process, the political process. And unfortunately, that's how, to some extent, it affected his health. And unfortunately, he passed away in 1999. So this shows how Tanzania has been a key player in peacemaking and conflict resolution regionally. And again, Tanzania also helped the founding of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, which is a regional body trying to address both peace, security, democracy, and development in the region. And in 1994, Tanzania hosted the International Conference on democracy, on peace, security, democracy, and development in the Great Lakes region. And they adopted the Dar es Salaam Declaration on peace, security, democracy, and development in 2004. And therefore, this shows how Tanzania political and peace diplomacy have, to a large extent, helped to try to stabilize a rather fragile region. And of course, as Ambassador said, as I went to Onam, also went to Seychelles, and in the Comoros, actually. The Comoros. And this also shows how try to ensure both the demilitarization of the Indian Ocean, but also maritime security and also stabilizing the neighboring countries, because in that way it affected their sovereignty, which is also a threat not only to Tanzania, to the region, and also to the world in general. And so it's a key player, actually. Tanzania has been a key player. She's a key player in the region.
Add something on the role that it has been playing. I think we are all aware of the Global Peace Index that is given every year. And in the last 6 years, Tanzania has been the leading nation in East Africa. Of recent, I think a month ago at the King's College in London, they are looking at the hotspots where conflicts, in terms of regions, where conflicts would lead into destabilization of the economies. And you see Tanzania being at number 63, very far ahead of the rest of the countries around here. It showed that Tanzania stands at the center of being a stabilizer in terms of the external shocks economically. You're talking about the flow of foreign direct investments, for example, and the attractiveness in the stock markets. And here, the largest stock market is Nairobi. but it is gaining, for example, Nairobi, which is what in Tanzania, from that aspect of Tanzania being the shock, being the stabilizer in terms of the foreign shocks in the economies. So you cannot also wish that away. By Tanzania maintaining its standards in terms of its position, when we are ranking the most peaceful countries in the world, its leadership in the region has been helping the rest of the regions, and many, many countries around here have benefited immensely and greatly in terms of economic development, economic growth.
Just to add one thing about when I said that Mwalimu conceptions of on peace was not only limited to negative peace. Actually, in order to have negative peace, we need to create conditions for peace and development.
Sure.
And
that's where I wanted to go. I wanted
yeah.
to say we've already established the current state of peace in Tanzania, that it is a peaceful country across the region. So what can other countries with instabilities learn? So I wanted to throw that question amongst you. Let's start with Ambassador. What do you think are the lessons that other countries across the region can learn from Tanzania with regards to peace and security?
Well, I think every country wants to be peaceful, but unfortunately they are not peaceful. So the best thing is to continue with the efforts to make sure that our region, that is East Africa and Southern Africa, is peaceful. For example, you can see Mozambique is being destabilized by terrorism now, but it's on our borders. So you cannot say Tanzania is peaceful when Mozambique is in trouble. You cannot say Tanzania is peaceful when Congo is on fire, because when they have problems, the problems are going to affect us. You're not going to say Tanzania is peaceful even as far as Somalia, because Somalia, Al-Shabaab are destabilizing Kenya. But if Kenya is destabilized, what happens to Tanzania? We must keep our eyes open and continue really pursuing this objective of trying to see, okay, we are peaceful, people are not coming to destabilize us, but we are helping our neighbors. Our neighbors should, when they are destabilized, we are not at peace as well. Yeah.
Doctor.
Ms. Ngaga, allow me to, first of all, qualify this concept of peace, because, you know, people would say, I mean, if you read reports, they say Tanzania is peaceful, but, you know, sometimes, yeah, you know, sometimes they have their own challenges. Well, I think it was 1932 when the Chinese statesman Mao Zedong, who is also regarded as one of the intellectuals of the time, he wrote a piece which is titled On Contradiction. On Contradiction. And he believes that in a society there must be conflicts, whether they are internal or external. And for him, conflicts are a necessary part of the society in order for that society to develop, okay? He's looking at society as, you know, composed of various actors, you know, different interests, you know, and these interests come together, you see? And when they come together is when they propel the society, you know, to, you know, modify or mend its ways, to reform itself and to move forward. So he's opposed to looking at a society as, you know, in terms of tranquility, you know. So we are not talking about peace and tranquility. You can only find tranquility in a water pond that is, you know, very calm, you know. There's nothing which is shaking. But if you are talking about a society, yeah, if you are talking about society, then you are talking about peace and security. That means there will be, you know, certain squabbles, you know, and people will have interests, they will push for this, they will push for reforms, and so on and so forth. So basically, I think it is important to have a better understanding of what we are discussing about peace and security. So, and of course, on that front of peace and security, we qualify as a very peaceful nation in this region. Sure. But again, I liked Dr. Kayoza's concept of Tanzania as a country that's regarded as a shock absorber. From the 1970s, for example, when Burundi and Rwanda had their trouble, the refugees ran to Tanzania. We accepted them. And some of them, we have even nationalized them. They are citizens. There have been efforts for repatriation and, maybe sending them to other third states that were interested in them. That is an important role that Tanzania has been playing. And actually, it is commended all over the world for playing such a role in terms of accommodating refugees. But again, I would like to remind you of the crisis in northern Mozambique, Cabo Delgado. The Honorable Ambassador was alluding to here. We are basically talking about terrorists, and I want to be specific here with this. They are called ISIS Mozambique. Some of them, some analysts actually refer to them as rebels, insurgents. But I think it is inappropriate, because in international law, the moment you refer to a group as a rebel group or an insurgent, then there are duties that should follow. First of all, you have recognized them. You need to declare neutrality, and they are even allowed to enter into contracts with other actors, in the on the international plane. So, but if you refer to them as terrorists, it is clear that they are people who should be fought for. So, and they've wreaked havoc in that area, and even Tanzania was also in trouble, because we can't be, at peace while your neighbors within the borders, are being attacked by terrorists. And of course, we played a very big role in terms of dealing with them as part of the SADC mission in Mozambique. We also know, of course, the Rwandan army was there in terms of a bilateral agreement between Mozambique and Rwanda. But you should also note that when the SADC mission was withdrawn, that was in July last year, we had to continue being there in order to ensure that the remnants of those terrorists, they do not come back to cause another havoc. So the shock absorber role has been very clear for the
Yes, so I just want to hit the nail on the lessons that others can play, because we've established that you're not peaceful if your neighbor is not peaceful. So it means that there is something that Tanzania is doing. I want that something that Tanzania is doing.
Maybe let me say one. That's something that we are doing, and the rest maybe they're not getting it so right. And I'm not saying that we are getting so right, absolutely right, but we are doing very well. And I think it's very important in these programs to try sometimes to refute some of the conjectures that some people are trying to make there outside. So I'd like to base my argument on that point. Some people around the region have been saying that we are not peaceful. We are taken for a ride by the leaders. And two, therefore, because of that, they have argued that our political culture, our political systems are making the society dull. And therefore, it's not a very good thing. But let's be clear here. When you talk about security and peace at the regional level, it is the supply side of peace, because you're looking at what are you extending to other countries. But that starts with the demand side of peace within the nation. You have to first, of course, consolidate the pillars of peace within, and then others can learn. So what we have outlined here, what we have explained here, is a function, a necessity that has come from the way Tanzania has been managing its political equation. And I think this is the biggest lesson that our friends have to be learning. You know, in other regions, in other places, in other countries, they have taken political liberalization without contextualizing what has to be in the African context of politics. And this is very important because the moment you miss the point at that spot, it's very easier to make your politics get diluted, and then you see a lot of wrangles and squabbles around. And let me also respond to some of because I've seen some intellectuals say that we are 30 years back from where they were in some years. And they've used, of course, political theories to justify that. For example, one that is being used is that Tanzania has remained the politics of integrum. They are recalling the famous philosopher, the Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci, when he said that the old ones are not dying and the new ones are refusing to be born, are not born. And they're saying that, you see, the political class of this country is restricting, is pushing everyone outside of the political equation. They don't want to get out of power. So because of their existence, and the country has remained backward. Contrary to that, because of the acumen of our political structures, our political systems, it has helped a lot. One, to maintain peace from the demand side of peace, and that has helped peace outside the country from the supply side of it, and that's why those people are enjoying about that. We are not saying people shouldn't be liberal as much as they can do, but they have to be very careful with the antics that come with liberalism, particularly in politics, because we have seen a lot of distortions, not only in Africa or in East Africa, but in other parts of the world. And Tanzania, if you look around here, we are being cautious, not because we fear, but because we want to protect what we are having, and then to make sure that we can build on that within, I must stress that, within on the demand side of peace and security, but also outside on the supply side of peace and security.
I wanted to make one point also about building a nation, because you're talking about lessons learned, and which can be offered to others. You know, Tanzania, Mwalimu has spent a lot of time trying to build cohesion and understanding among the Tanzanian people, to build a nation called Tanzania. If you look at some nations in Africa, some of them even, I don't know if they deserve to be called nations at all. They're just geographical expressions, as some Nigerians call it. You know, Nigerians of the north and Nigerians of the south and Nigerians of the east. You know, they are different people altogether when you meet them. You know, you just don't meet a Nigerian and you assume that the whole of Nigeria is like that. He asks you whether you are an Igbo or you are a Yoruba, but if you're coming from the north, you are a different one, from an Igbo, from an, you know, that kind of thing. And how they manage that to maintain the semblance of peace is a challenge of their own. But even our neighbors, some of our neighbors are facing similar problems. You know, people call each other by tribal areas where they come from, or parts of the country where they come from, and so on. Something you cannot find in Tanzania, but it didn't just happen. Mwalimu spent a lot of time trying to build this entity called Tanganyika, and later on Tanzania. So that unity among the people, harmony, Tanzania as a nation, the cohesion, I think it contributes a lot to the kind of peace that you find exceptionally here in Tanzania.
And what the ambassador and the rest of my colleagues said, In 1966, there is an American political scientist, Gabriel Monde. He tried to highlight 4 kinds of problems faced by modernizing post-colonial states. And actually, one is state building. And state building actually is the capacity of a state to project its infrastructure power, the power to penetrate and transform the society. And given the backdrop of the post-colonial state, the colonial state, which is based on despotic power, the power to control and suppress. So for the first, you transform society in terms of development. And then nation building, building an overarching national identity that is above these subnational identities, which of course have contributed to division. And if you, in the words of the former Mozambican nationalist leader and the first president, Samora Machel, is that for a nation to live, tribe must die. It doesn't mean that the primordial identity must die, but rather more efforts should be directed now to building a stronger national identity that will contribute to national cohesion and peace. And then encouraging participation, people to participate in processes, whether political process, democratic process, legislative process, and even the, of course, democratic process, the electoral process. Because given the immediate backdrop that people were excluded from participation during the colonial era, and therefore they had to participate in that to give them ownership of their development. And also you are creating conditions for building peace, justice, and strong institutions. And finally, redistribution of resources. And Tanzania actually has succeeded that because guided by this philosophy of humanism, where you have now you're building human capital development in terms of improvement, health capital, education capital. And therefore, you're creating conditions for both peace and development. And you reduce social inequalities. Of course, you might see that in some countries, you might see that whether you have a certain degree of peace at the surface level. But beneath the surface, you might hostility bubbling beneath the surface. And this might also create a condition for violence. And then Tanzania also, what to learn from Tanzania is the peaceful, Tanzania has been promoting peaceful coexistence on the region, which is why it has been participating in different peace initiatives and peace operations. Ambassador cited the Forced Intervention Brigade 2013 in the DRC, where Tanzania contributed 1 battalion and the other one from South Africa and Malawi, SAMIM, and then SAMI DRC, and the other missions around the region, including UNAMID, UNAMIS, and United Nations Interim Security Force in ABA, a disputed region between South Sudan and Sudan, and MINUSCA and also UNIFIL. And again, also peaceful settlement of disputes. One thing that distinguishes Tanzania from the rest of her peers around the region is that not everything is confrontational and dialogue. The Tanzania way is dialogue. That we need to talk. That is Ubuntu. And is a target to traditional Africa, which is why alternative mechanism for peaceful solution. And finally, we have to look for, as I said, it also contributes to that good, in terms of good neighborliness, in terms of trying to coexist with the neighbors and so on. I think this will contribute, will help the region stabilize and build a more prosperous future for the region.
On his point, right, when you talked about people's participation, let's not forget, let's remember, let's tell our viewers that the charter, the African Charter on People's Participation Development was born here in Tanzania in 1990 in Arusha. And if you read the speech given by the late Al-Hassan Mwinyi, it was very constructive to the point that it contributed a lot in the refinement of that particular charter. So in terms also of thinking on how people could be participating in their development, Tanzania was at the center of it in 1990 in Arusha.
You've spoken about some countries which have internal divisions. Now, how is integration amongst different countries across the continent possible if there is a breakage within the nations? I'm going to give 1 minute as a concluding remark, kind of a way forward now to have a unified East African community and a unified Africa as a whole. Ambassador.
Well, I think is to decide when you are doing integration, they say you shift the loyalty from the national units to the center, to like the East African community, if you want to build the East African, a strong East African community, we should identify some areas where we want the East African community to be strong and to take care of it. And that way, that institution becomes very strong. In other words, even if we just start by just implementing what the summits agree every year, what they want to do. But what happens is people take resolutions from OAU, from United Nations, from East African Community, and they are not internalized to become part of the operational laws of the country. And this way, some countries would walk away from commitments.
So we should walk from documents to the actual practicality.
Actual practicality, and there's no mechanism to ensure that, because once they come out of that collective decision making, it is up to the nation states to domesticate the resolutions into the laws of that country. And usually they do domesticate some of these laws where their national interests are involved. For example, in Tanzania, the United Nations resolutions on gender, on children, on health, and so on, these are easily internalized into our own laws. But many other resolutions are not, it's not only for Tanzania. This is a problem with implementing the UN resolutions. But it comes down to UN, OAU resolutions. It comes down to the East African community resolutions, you know. So what I'm saying is, whatever we agree to do together in an integration scheme, we should follow up with the domesticating that into national laws, so that all of us are implementing the decisions that are made at regional level.
Dr.
Well, for me, of course, we were discussing about
1 minute each.
Yeah, 1 minute, yeah. the lessons that we export to the region, but I think we also should look at what lessons we import, because when we are talking about peace and security, it is not something that is guaranteed forever. So, for example, we should learn from how our neighbors, maybe operate, and some of the challenges they faced. For example, Dr. Kayoza mentioned about the 2007 Kenyan election, which escalated into violence. So the biggest lesson that we take from there is how we should manage our elections to ensure that they do not escalate into violence. But another important lesson is that of recent we had, the Gen Z in Kenya, for example, same Kenya, and the havoc that they caused in the country. And the result is, they say peace is a product of justice, okay? Justice and observance of rights. In Kenya, for example, what we learned is that there was, a bill, a budget bill that was not in favor of the masses. So it is against, the conception of justice and rights of the people. So these are the lessons that we should also pick from our neighbors in order to ensure that we continue to perpetuate peace in our country.
Can unity, peace, and security be attained within the East African context?
Yes, when all is said and done, it boils down to economic prosperity. Every citizen of East Africa is looking at that. And as we have said, there's a relationship between peace and economic prosperity. So, my advice is, there is no any economic integration that has been successful when it disintegrated, it's castrated peace from economics. And therefore, it's very important to the region, to the leaders, to the thinkers, that what Keynes Maynard wrote in 1999, after the First World War, what he called the economic consequences of the peace has to be embraced so much in the region so that we can embrace, on one side, the economic aspirations we're looking for, but on the other, we have to be mindful that without factoring in the peace question, nothing will come into fruition.
I think it all comes down to, as the main objective of the Pan-Africanism was to create the bonds of solidarity and an overarching Pan-African identity that will transcend all these national, ethnic, tribal, and linguistic identities. And for that matter, in order to achieve that, then we need also to have some unifying identity. And the Kiswahili can be integral to that identity and also contribute to peace and security in the region. And again, we have to encourage multi-level participation in the integration process as per the AESC principle of subsidiarity. And this will allow for bottom-up integration, integrating people in the region, bringing them together, taking the integration to the streets. I think this is why the EU has relatively succeeded after the Maastricht Treaty of 1982. And in that way, then we'll also further democratize the process, and will contribute to development, because regional integration is a key tool for economic development. And in that way, the region can achieve both the second liberation as well as promoting prosperity across the region, including peace and security, because in peace studies we often define war or violence as development in reverse, and therefore that will contribute to that. But for this to happen, then there should be mutual trust among the partner states, but also they should carry collective responsibility, because, as I said, it always takes two to tango in that way. It's a shared responsibility.
Thank you very much to you all so much. Regional integration is a key to economic development, is a message that I want to leave to you today. But this is the end of today's program. We will be back discussing East African community issues. We'll have a discussion about this in the next episode. Today, you were with me, Faitha Ngaga, and with me was Dr. Richard Mbunda, political analyst from the University of Dar es Salaam, Dr. Bravius Kahyoza, economic analyst. We had Isa Omari, political analyst, and Ambassador Dr. Msuya Mangachi. Until next time, goodbye.